really excited to put this event on, and we're really excited to have our presenters here who are very generously presenting to you all, and then also meeting one-on-one with some faculty on campus. And so I want to just briefly introduce them, explain the format of the event, and then I'll let you all sort of go from there. So we have Kristen Buckles, who is the editor-in-chief at University of Arizona Press, where she has worked since 2004, overseeing the editorial program and the acquisitions department. She acquires scholarly titles across Latinx and border studies and Native American Indigenous studies. She works closely with series editors on several highly regarded book series, including Border Visions, Latinx Pop Culture, Critical Issues in Indigenous Studies, the Feminist Wire books. Kristen is actively seeking new titles that will further enhance the University of Arizona's press collection in Latinx studies, border studies, and Native American and Indigenous studies, while also expanding its catalog of works on Central America and U.S. Central Americans. Then we have Elizabeth Ault, who is senior editor at Duke University Press, where she has worked since 2012, I believe. She has steadily acquired titles in African studies, as well as titles in film and media studies, American studies, and theory from the global South. She is interested in interdisciplinary projects that connect historical and emerging conditions with a focus on race, gender, sexuality, disability, including in the areas of urban studies, Middle East studies, Black and Latinx studies, trans studies, disability studies, and critical prison studies. All the studies that are increasingly important right now, right? And so the format will be that Elizabeth and Kristen will talk for a combined total of 30 to 45 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A. I suggested some topics they might discuss, including first books, turning dissertations into a book, selecting a press, making contact with them, crafting convincing perspectives, understanding contracts and timelines, and so on. And so I believe Elizabeth will start with the process leading up to working with the press, developing the book manuscript and the like, and then Kristen will take over, but they will also interject if they have pressing tips that they want to provide, and then we'll have questions and answers where I will collect 2 to 3 questions at a time for our distinguished guests. All right, everyone please welcome Kristen Buckles and Elizabeth Ault, and thank you for coming.
Good morning. Thank you everyone for coming out, finding this beautiful building, and enjoying the sunshine when you could be outside. I feel like this is maybe rare in February in Eugene, so I'm grateful for you being here. I'm also so grateful to Erin, to Eli, to Janice, to CLALAS, and everyone at the University of Oregon for being such enthusiastic and generous hosts. I know there is so much going on your campus, and so again, just to choose to take the time to be here, given everything that's happening on campus and in the world, is just really energizing for me. It's a funny time to be talking about publishing. There's so much uncertainty. Publishing is always happening in multiple dimensions, multiple timelines, as Kristen and I will talk about. This week I've been meeting with authors whose books might not come out until 2030, because that's a real year that's going to happen. At the same time, the Duke Press Spring Catalog books have started to drop, and the cover of the catalog is a book that I first discussed with the author while she was finishing her dissertation in 2016. So kind of trying to create some certainty or a narrative arc or an outline of process, especially right now, is a little daunting. I myself have been in full serenity prayer mode so far in 2025, and so my goal for today will be to focus on the things we can control, and that is really, I think, right now, we're thinking about writing, publishing, what we need to do. And again, I just think it's always worth gathering to reiterate our shared commitment to ideas, to intellectual life, to writing, to sharing ideas as a way to build community, publishing as just a key way to do that, to practice that, to build the community, to try to build the world we want to see, to offer people tools that might meet the moment, whatever that moment turns out to be. So again, I'm just very grateful for the invitation. Kristen, did you want to say anything else before I jump into kind of process stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I have some things I'm going to say. So I'm going to start with talking about developing the book project. So almost, my assumption is most people in this room, not everyone, has written a dissertation. And many of you, some of you have already turned your dissertation into a book, congratulations. Some of you are at the precipice of trying to figure out how to take this thing that you spent years developing, and you're like, wait, I'm sorry, I have to do what now? It's a whole other thing. And so, I guess today we just kind of want to demystify that process and just think about how to turn a dissertation into a book. For some people who are writing subsequent books, we'll also talk a little about how to develop a book project from scratch. And I think one of the key things to think about is audience. So one of the most important things in writing your first book is transitioning from thinking of yourself as a student. Not that you won't always be a student of life, but when you are writing your book, you are the author of your book. You are the authority. So often the dissertation is about, I got this kind of weird idea, or I want to bring these two fields together, I want to create this conversation, and you have to sort of convince, especially if you're in a disciplinary field, a history department, an English department, convince people that this intersection exists, that this phenomenon you want to study is real. And so there's often a lot of defensive writing, or sort of, you have to kind of include canonical text because, oh gosh, you know, Erin and I had that conversation about this author, and if Joanne Rappaport is not cited in this chapter, it's going to be a problem. Although you should probably be citing Joanne Rappaport. Anyway, so the key thing though is you in your book are the theorist. You are the author, you have something to offer people, and it's important instead of writing defensively to write positively, as though here's my offering to you. Here's what I have to say. Here's what you, readers, stand to gain from reading this book. Because in a dissertation, your committee members agree in advance as part of their jobs to read the dissertation from start to finish. No one has necessarily agreed in advance to read your book from start to finish, and so you as the author have the job of giving them a reason to keep reading. So right up front, you need to offer, like, here's the takeaway, here's the tool, here's the claim, here's why this book is worth spending hours of your life with, here's why I needed to write 80,000 words on this topic, and here's why it's worth sticking with me across the arc of the book. I also think often in graduate school we're trained to talk about our work by talking about what we work on. So I think of a book as having two components. There's what the book is about, so that would be like, you know, oh, I work on 19th century Andean history. But then there's what the book is doing, right? So like, how is the book shifting our understanding of that time period, or what different archive or different set of conversations are you putting that in? So for example, you know, I worked on a book with someone who did a long-term ethnography on the main city dump in Dakar, Senegal. So the book was about the dump, the book was about, you know, the sanitation workers, the book was about her field work there. But really what the book was doing was trying to shift our understanding of post-colonial urban politics in Senegal to include sort of a politics of disposability and a politics of cleanliness, and like analyze how that fit into broader transnational frames that were happening at that time. So I think, especially for us at Duke, I'm sure Kristen would say the same thing, it's really important to be able to articulate not only what your book is about, but what your book is doing. And I think that is crucial to highlight across the project. And again, I think thinking of your audience in this time is really important. We don't know if books are going to be taught in the classroom. Of course, that's a goal, but I think, I'm not going to make people raise their hands. But my understanding is that most people who are teaching undergraduates are like not assigning full books. And yet people continue to write full books, people continue to read full books, whether it's in the classroom or not. And so thinking of yourself as writing for an interested reader, not someone who's going to be trying to naysay you, not your haters. Write for like the literary agent Tom McKinnon says, write for your woke niece. And think about like, what are the tools that woke niece needs like in her kind of theoretical, historical arsenal as she prepares to meet our moment. And I think it's also an exciting time to think about form in that way, if we're thinking less about that books need to have 4 chapters or need to be written in a particular way. Of course, if that is the way that your brain works, if that is the way that your project breaks down, that's fantastic. But I think it is an interesting time to be thinking about voice and the parameters of kind of what you can get away with in terms of personal writing, in terms of different types of form, auto theory. That's obviously always been a big part of our list at Duke. And again, writing books that have a life outside of the classroom, that are really thinking about our shared intellectual life and the way that that does, and sometimes does not fit within kind of the assigned parameters of the university. And I think that's also why finding the right press and the right editor is so important. And so when you're thinking about where you want to publish this book, that you now have a sense of like, what is my distinctive contribution? What do I want this book to do? The classic advice, of course, is to like look at your bibliography, look at your bookshelves. What presses are publishing the books that you're reading? It's really important to know when you do this that you want to look at books that have come out in the last like 5 years, because we often get proposals for series that have not published a book in a decade or more, and that just says to me maybe this person is not quite understanding the current shape of the list. It's true that editors tend to stay at presses for a long time, but priorities can change, list areas can change, series editors can come and go, and so it's really important when you're thinking about picking a press to look at what the press is currently publishing. And I know that it can seem intimidating, like we're sitting up here in the front of the room, we have the mics, we're like kind of literally gatekeepers. It's like not the part of our jobs editors like to talk about. We like to talk about enabling people and like helping ideas to flourish, but the reality is, of course, we do have to say no a lot. But also the other reality is we need to publish books. So editors need authors just as much as authors need editors. And so we are very invested also in selling books, making the books available. So there's a lot of information about university presses available on the internet. Our catalogs are available, our websites have searchable lists of all of the books that we've published, all the editors' biographies are on there. I always recommend a fun little Google Books acknowledgement search. You can figure out which editor people worked with by looking at their acknowledgements. You can talk to your friends, your colleagues, people you're on conference panels with. Who are they working with? What are they reading? You can take a look at the book room, at the conferences in your field. Who are the presses whose books are on display there? So there's a lot of ways to kind of figure out what is the right press for me. You do not need to know someone to introduce you to an editor. We get cold pitches all the time. We welcome them. Of course, if you have worked with someone who was our author, that's also great, but it's absolutely not necessary. So I think, and again, I just really want to emphasize, for me, and I don't want to speak for Kristen, but talking with authors is one of the best parts of my job. Acquisition editors, our job is a little bit kind of like an A&R rep for a record label or a talent scout for a sports team. We want to know what's out there. We want to keep up with what's happening. In general, big conferences are one of the key ways that we do that, and so thinking about the conferences that you attend and thinking about those as times to potentially set up meetings with editors can be a really helpful timeline. Even if you don't feel like, oh, I'm not going to be ready by LASA to talk about my book, actually be ready by LASA to talk about your book. You don't have to pretend that everything is ready and done. It can be information. But taking advantage of those times, like right now when editors are on your campus, or when you're traveling to somewhere where editors are going to be, to have that conversation, to see how your ideas are landing, to have the opportunity to have someone maybe ask you some questions about maybe audience that you might not be thinking about when you're really thinking about maybe the granularity of your theoretical concept or your historical archive. It's always good to take advantage of those opportunities, even if you don't feel ready, because the reality is because of personality and also because of social pressures, different forms of privilege and access that people grew up with, some people might never feel ready, and some people always feel ready. So I would encourage you to approach editors when you have the chance, and if an editor reaches out to you, it's always worth taking the meeting. Unless you have signed a book contract for your book with another press and you have no other ideas, then you can say, I don't have anything to discuss, that's fine. But if you are out there shopping a book or in the early stages of working on a book, it is always worth if someone reaches out to you to take the meeting. Yes, and so in general then, you want to have an ability to talk about your book. And that's where having a book proposal comes in. We are living, I think, right now in a golden age of what I like to call the book proposal industrial complex, and I do just want to state a little bit of caution about that, because at Duke Press, we do not send proposals for first books out for review. So when you're sending in your book proposal and chapters for a first book, those are really just for me to read. So they're really just for the editor. Some fields do send out proposals and chapters. Kristen, what do you do?
We do. We send out proposals.
Okay. Excellent. So that's a key question you want to ask the editor that you're working with. Will you be sending the proposal and chapters out for review, or do you want to wait for the full manuscript? And that could really make a difference depending, to your timeline, to how you're thinking about tenure materials, to how you're thinking about the proposal. So for me, I'm thinking more about the book because we don't publish the proposal, we publish the book. And so since the proposal generally speaking is not going out for peer review, the chapters are really important to me to get a sense of what the actual experience of reading the book is going to be like. So I think there is a lot of emphasis on the proposal, and I think it is very important to be able to articulate those things I've been talking about. What is your book doing? Who is your book for? Covering the sort of the basics of what is the argument of the project, what is the archive the project is drawing on, and I don't necessarily mean a historical archive, but maybe it's a corpus of texts, a set of films, a set of performances, visual texts, etc., literary archives. What is the material the project is using to make that argument, and then what is the arc of the book? So those three things, the argument, the archive, and the arc, are the key things that a book proposal needs to cover along with the audience. And so then once you have that proposal and sample chapters to send, you may not have those when you first meet with an editor, you may have like an initial conversation, and then down the line, they'll ask you to send that material in. And at that point, it's fine to submit that material to multiple presses. Editors expect that you're still trying to shop the book around to find the right fit. Maybe you've had some initial conversations with several editors, they've all asked to see the proposal and sample materials, and one editor will say, well, this looks really great, but my list has changed directions, so this isn't a fit. One editor will say, I want a full manuscript, and one editor will say, I'm ready to send the proposal and sample chapters out, and then you have a decision to make. Often presses will request exclusive review, so that is the stage at which you have to commit to a press. So for the initial submission of proposal and sample chapters, it's fine to send that broadly, but once someone is going to send material out for peer review, that represents a significant commitment of resources, and most presses will ask you to commit at that point. Part of that is because, for me, and I think for most editors, we can't just say, oh, this book is great, I'm going to give you a contract. There's other processes in place that Kristen will speak more about that we have to do in order to be able to offer that contract. So our sending something out for peer review is really our vote of confidence in our project. So I think I'll stop there, and maybe we'll segue into peer review, and then I'll look forward to the continued discussion.
Is it on at the bottom? Did you press the red button at the bottom? Okay. Well, first of all, thanks. That's okay. Thanks everyone for coming out. It's really great to see everyone here. Like Elizabeth said, on this beautiful sunny day. Thank you to everyone at CLLAS who had us out here. Aaron and Chris and Eli and Janice, and I see Yvette Saavedra, who's on the board of directors at CLLAS, just came in. So it's really a joy to be here in Eugene. I am at the University of Arizona Press, and we are considered a small press by university press standards. So I think it's really great to have us both here, because I think Duke is a big press, right, by university press standards.
Sure,
Bigger than us.
we do 50 books a year.
So we do 50 books a year.
Okay.
So, and we don't have a journals program. We are considered a small, we have 13 people on staff. So what I'm going to talk about is really sort of through that lens of working at a small press. I will say that the process, and what I'm going to talk about is just go over the steps from the time the author sends in the manuscript for peer review, quickly through the steps to the actual book. And so my perspective comes from the 21 years I've been working at the University of Arizona Press. And largely, university presses do things pretty similarly in those steps, but there's probably some differences between how we do things in Duke. So maybe this could be a little bit conversational, if you can chime in if there's something different. So I'm going to divide these steps into sort of three areas: the acquisitions process, editing, design, and production, and marketing. So the acquisitions process is, this is your acquiring editor and their team of editorial assistants who are working with you directly to get your book from submission, peer review, and acceptance. And the big part of this process is that peer review part. Like, I'm sure everyone has heard about peer review. Everyone's probably has stories about peer review. But it's really what we as acquiring editors spend a lot of our time on. Finding peer reviews, reading peer reviews, talking with authors about peer reviews, working with authors on like what makes sense of these in these peer reviews. Like, what do you want to fold into your manuscript? So peer review is a really, really big part of what we do. And in general, so peer review has like the purpose of, yes, it really is part of our decision-making process. Like, university presses, they don't advance a project to a faculty board or an editorial board until there's sound peer review. So yes, it does have that mechanism of gatekeeping, but really what we like to think about peer review is an opportunity to get outside feedback to really develop a project. It's getting, your peers to sort of weigh in, to support, to champion, to really encourage you to write the best possible book, and here is some feedback to do that. So that's the way I think of peer review. Like, I can imagine it's scary to get your work out, but to outside readers, but it's an opportunity. And when I talk to authors, I'm like, think of it as sort of like, you have your dream team of people, like, workshopping your project with you. So peer review is a big step in the process. And so selection of peer reviewers is super important. And we spend a lot of time like thinking about peer reviewers. If it's a book in a series, we'll engage series editors and ask like, what do you think might be good for this? I will ask an author. Often editors will get input from an author on potential peer reviewers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Also, I like to get feedback on potential non-reviewers.
Yeah.
That also is important because we want people who want the book to be good.
Yeah.
You're not writing for your haters.
Yeah. So we think a lot about like, really good peer reviewers. And, we understand everyone's working on a deadline and a timeline, especially when you're up for tenure or promotion. And so we really do everything we can to get those peer reviews in on time, but I'm sure folks have heard that, there are challenges that happen. I mean, first, sometimes it's just hard to find peer reviewers. Everyone is busy, folks, the plates are full, it's hard to take on a peer review. So that can happen, or maybe a peer reviewer will have to drop out like midway through because of a family situation, so we'll have to find another peer reviewer to replace that person. Or you have the case of split reviews, right, where someone says, I love it, and the other person says, no. So it's like, then we might have to find a third reviewer. So I'm saying all of this because peer review can be time-consuming. It can be a long process. Have patience. Understand that your editor and the editorial team, it's not in a acquiring department. You're working with your editor, but there's also other people working in the background who you might not even interact with, like editorial assistants and others. It's a whole team, and that whole team is really there to support and champion your book and work with you to get that book through the process. So we've created mechanisms to sort of like check in with peer reviewers, like after a couple weeks. How's it going? Like you're working on it. Just so, because sometimes, you'll get to that like deadline and they'll be like, oh, I forgot. So we've kind of created some mechanisms to check in, just to try and do whatever we can to sort of mitigate that situation where like the peer review is going to be super late. So peer review is is something that is like a big part of our work, right? And so once we get those peer reviews, we send them to the author. They're anonymized, so you won't know who peer reviewed unless they individually identify themselves to you outside of the press process. And then we will ask you to write some kind of response letter, like how are you gonna take this feedback? What are you gonna include in your manuscript? Like, and this is your book, so you don't have to do everything, right? Like, this is feedback. You don't have to like do every single thing the peer reviewer said. But, you know, we wanna hear from you, like what was valuable? How are you gonna revise the manuscript? And that's a conversation with the editor, like what makes sense from a publishing perspective, like for how you're gonna frame your book or, you know, the length of the book. You know, if the peer reviewer says, you know, add lots of images and 2 more chapters, we might be like, whoa, okay, let's talk about this. So there are sort of things from the publishing perspective that we will add on top of the peer reviews when we're talking with the authors. So it's those peer reviews that get you to the finish line, which is like going up, the editor going up to the board and getting approval on the project. And that work piece sort of different. The timing of the board and the composition of the board varies by the different presses. But there's always going to be some kind of board approval at the end of that process. So the signature thing of university presses is peer review and some kind of board approval and working with like awesome series editors to help you along the way. So that's what's really fantastic about university presses, and I will say that university presses, not just acquisitions teams, but everyone in the university press are book people who love the craft and who are really authors like focused on really sort of like supporting, like we recognize the value of your work, why your work is important, and we're gonna like work with you through the process. So that's peer review. Now at some point in that peer review process, you're gonna get a contract, and this is also something that varies by presses, like Elizabeth had sort of mentioned. We at the University of Arizona Press, we will send a proposal and sample chapter out for peer review, and then that might result in a contract. Other presses might do it differently. So that contract, this timing of the contract is different for different presses. But the contract that's a really important piece, and I know it's like not as exciting to talk about a contract, but it's a really important piece because what that contract is doing 2 things. First, it's like, it's the assignment of rights. So you as author hold all the rights to your intellectual property in your manuscript, and the press can't do anything with that until you assign the rights to the publisher. So that contract is that document where you as author are assigning the rights. It has to do with copyright law. We have to have that contract in order to do our work. And the second thing the contract does is it's establishing the responsibilities of the press and the author. So it will sort of detail, the press is going to publish the book, we're going to sell the book, we're going to copy edit the book, here are what your royalties are, and here are the number of free copies you're going to get, all of the things that the press does. The contract also spells out like all the things you as author are responsible to do or to. And sometimes there are little surprises in there, like for instance the index. I'm not sure if folks know, but generally the author is responsible for doing the index, and I think that's pretty standard now for university presses. Like sometimes authors don't realize that at the end you're going to have to also create the index for the book. So that's going to be in the contract too. Other things like if you want a map in the book, you're going to be the one to create it and pay for it. Is that yeah?
Right, and you don't have to index the book yourself. That is like a very specialized skill, and my brain certainly does not work that way, but you would be responsible for paying somebody else to create the index.
Right.
Or indexing it yourself,
Right.
if you have one of those brands.
Yeah. I hear the joke like an author will do an index once and never do it again. It's so awful. But so the contract is an important piece, and I think just again going back to that team of support in-house, like ask your editor, or sometimes at presses there's like a contracting division. Do you all have that? You work on a contract? So ask your editor, if you have any questions whatsoever about the contract, like, don't just ask us. We have, the editor, we have a contract coordinator who's there to help, there's a team. So that contract piece comes in at some point between when you submit the manuscript and acceptance. So once your project is accepted, then the next phase is what we call editing, design, and production. EDP is our shorthand for that. And EDP, so what you're gonna do is you get your manuscript ready, and that's essentially making your final revisions, like incorporating the peer reviewers' input, working with your editor to get it all ready for publication. Presses usually have on the website like guidelines for how to prepare your manuscript, how to transmit it. We have like a platform we use that authors upload. So there's usually guidelines for how to do that. So the EDP team, editing, design, and production, they're going to have your manuscript copy edited, they're gonna do all the design work, they're gonna create the ebook, which has become a whole separate, it's like technical field, like creating ebooks. They're gonna design the cover in coordination. This is the whole area, right? The cover, maybe we can say that for the end. The cover conversation, and then, so EDP, once your manuscript is in EDP, they're working on a schedule, right? So in the acquisitions process where some books we're working on that won't come out until 2030, we in acquisitions are used to working on this long, time schedule. EDP, they're making the book. So once,
Literally, there's a spot on the press at the printer reserved for your book, and if it misses it, there might not be another one in the same time frame. So my deadlines are fake. The EDP deadlines are real.
yeah, and it's kind of funny, it's kind of a cultural thing. Like the EDP folks are like, maybe they didn't turn in their manuscript for peer review. I'm like, that's how we work. And so they're like,
Well, these are also the copy editors, right? These are the people who are like, it's actually a semicolon, not a colon.
yeah.
And God bless, because it couldn't be me, but there is a level of specificity to all parts of that process.
Technical expertise, these are the craft wizards. They know every single thing about the conventions of book publishing and ebook publishing, which again is a new, very technical, specialized area. So, so they are really your book is on a schedule. So for us, and this is, I think, there may be some differences in presses, but once a book gets into EDP, we're working on a 10-month to a year-ish schedule.
We say 12 months.
Yeah. So, right now, the manuscripts that are coming in for the manuscripts are coming in for the spring 2026 list and going into EDP.
Mm-hmm.
So that is EDP. The last group of people to work on your book are the marketing team. And the marketing team, they really step in while EDP is doing their work. Their role is to get your book out there to the widest possible audience. That's what they do. They're their kind of job is just to get that book out. So they do pre-publication work, they're working in consult with the author and the acquiring editor on title and cover conversations. They're writing the copy, they're securing the blurbs, they're doing the metadata for the book. You wonder how your book gets on Amazon and all these places, it's that metadata, so that's a whole other thing, right? They're doing the website, they're creating flyers, that's all before the book is out. Once a book is out, they're doing stuff like sending that book to conferences, sending it to awards committees, journals, for book reviews, doing social media, and other sorts of things. But what they always say the author is really the best marketer for the book, right? They can do all this stuff, but really you're in there with the audience, you have your networks. If you can do little things like, adding your book title to your email tagline, if you do social media, give your book shout out on social media, going to conferences, maybe you can plan a conference, presentation presentation right around the time of the book. Those are really awesome when someone's doing a talk and then afterwards they go to the press table and
Oh yeah, the year your book comes out, you will be on the conference circuit if you want people to read it. And you do want people to read it. Like, I feel like often people are like, oh no, I don't, no. You want people to read your book. So that means like you're going to AHA, you're going to LASA, you're going to do talks at universities. Like if you are, yes, you're covering the field. You are the best hype person for your book. You're on New Books Network podcast, although I have heard people say that now they just listen to New Books Network podcast interviews instead of reading the book. So if you do go on, don't do too good of a job.
yeah. So yeah, it's important for you to get out there and help us spread the word. And then finally, there is also business and admin teams at university presses, and I think those, don't come into the conversation a lot, but there's a whole team of people who are doing all that background work, paying royalties, keeping the press running, HR, all that overhead work, also doing like the work of innovation, whether it's like open access projects or, new forms of like publishing models like print on demand, accessibility. So there's also a team of people that are working in the background who you might not interact with every day, who are also doing the work of university presses and share the values of university presses. Wanted to shout out to them too, because they also are part of the presses and part of the team that you're going to get when you're working with a university press. So I think that was a really quick overview. I certainly probably missed some steps, but let's see.
Oh, that's why we have Q&A.
Yes.
Nice to see the other mics.
Great, let's give them a round of applause.
Now, magically in my handover.
Yes. It occurred to me when you all were thanking our team, which is an amazing team, that I forgot to thank the Vice President for Equity and Inclusion for helping co-sponsor this event, and that's a very important piece. So I want to make sure everyone gets their shout out and their flowers as well. And so I wrote down like a billion questions, but I'm not going to monopolize the time. I'm going to invite them, and then if there's time, I'll ask mine. But questions for either of our editors here, or for both of them. I'll touch 2 or 3 at a time. Yeah.
Hello, thank you so much for
Well,
being
you
here.
could introduce yourself.
Oh, my name is Cardella. I'm a PhD candidate in anthropology. I'm starting my dissertation now, so this is like great timing. I guess my question is, so you mentioned how much the editing, design, and production, how long that takes, but I'm wondering how long the actual acquisition part takes. But just as part of that question, I'm also kind of wondering like how much a dissertation needs to change to become a book. Because I understand that the dissertation is available through our university's website, so I'm assuming there has to be a lot of change in there. So that's kind of my question.
Great.
Anita Shari, Associate Professor of Political Science. I just had a question for you all about, so what's your kind of, you've got a few books under your belt and you're trying to pitch a book that's maybe, going in different directions than your previous book. I'm curious if there are things that acquisitions editors are looking for to, if you're approaching someone new, you're not approaching someone that you've worked with before, in terms of getting getting in the door that way, especially if your interests have sort of shifted in certain ways. And also, what's the earliest you think is a good time to start pitching a new book to acquisition editors, in terms of how much material should you have to send them?
Great. We'll take one more question here.
I'm Allison Taylor Adams. I'm program instructor postdoc in linguistics. And I'm kind of jumping off the first question about dissertation and like sort of when you start thinking about this, and also recognizing that the book process is very long, but in the meantime we might be wanting to develop journal articles that pull off of that research, and like what is the relationship between the interim journal articles and sort of the overarching project.
Great. So we have each person asked multiple questions. That's great. That's great. So do either of you want to jump in on any of those?
Okay, and next round will be someone whose name does not begin with an A asking question challenge, so you won't.
Okay, these are next.
These are excellent questions. start with the first question, because these are crucial aspects of the dissertation to book process that I did not cover, so thank you for asking about them. So I'm going to say something daunting, and then I'm going to explain it. In general, I tell someone from the time that you submit the completed manuscript, the full manuscript, which is what I need to send out for peer review, to the time you are holding the book in your hand, 3 years. Because it needs to go out for peer review, as Kristen mentioned. I now tell people to expect peer review to take 4 to 6 months. We ask people to send their reviews in 6 to 8 weeks.
That's what we do.
We rarely, if ever, have 2 reviews within 8 weeks of receiving the manuscript. And especially given the areas that we publish in, the scholars who we want to read your manuscript are scholars who are themselves under attack, who are marginalized, who are doing solidarity work for students who are marginalized and under attack, who are also doing care work, who are all so everyone has too many things to do, and peer review is undercompensated labor. It is really affective work that people do to support their colleagues, to support their intellectual fields, but it is often not someone's priority, and it's hard to insist that it be. So people are mindful. I would say it's very rare that people just don't ever submit anything and never respond to our emails, but it just takes longer. So we are still getting the same quality and depth of reviews, but it takes 4 to 6 months instead of 3 months to get it now. Then there is the process of revising the manuscript, and that can depend on your own capacity. What kind of care work are you performing? Is there, say, a global pandemic? Is there an uprising on your campus? Do you have care responsibilities? So all of these things can influence the length of time it's going to take you to do your revisions, on top of what kinds of revisions did the reviewers ask for? Was it sort of include some citations here and there, or think about this sort of theoretical question, or was it add another chapter, and then you think that's actually a great idea? So the scope and scale of the revisions are also going to affect how long it takes to do the revisions. At Duke Press, once the book is under contract after a positive initial first round of reviews, we're going to send that revised manuscript back out for a sign-off before we take it to our board for approval. In the same way that you, as a professor, would not allow a student to defend a dissertation that you didn't think was going to be successfully defended, we are not going to take anything to our board that we don't think they're going to approve, and so we have that insurance round of sign-off after a revised manuscript comes in, so that adds another few months to the process. Then once the book goes in, is approved, goes into EEP, that's a year. So from submission of manuscript to book in your hand is about 3 years. It can go faster, it often goes faster, but I think leading with that number is a helpful, as my sister would say, she's in sales, a level set. And so that does not include the years of discussion in advance of having the full manuscript. So that can be anywhere from, I said I met Gina Kim in 2016, and now her book is on the spring 2025 Duke Press catalog cover. So I think the pre-conversation about what's happening, how much people are changing, people are publishing journal articles, all of that is happening in the years often before the full manuscript even comes in. And that's why I think figuring out that argument and what the book is doing is so key to figuring out what can you publish as an article? What is getting cut from the dissertation? What's not making it into the book? I think about this as, again, if you're watching a music video, and the music video is for a 3-minute song, they did not shoot 3 minutes of footage to make the music video. They shot hours and hours of footage, and it did not all make it in. So what is on your cutting room floor? And I think this goes also to the peer review question. I think Kristen really hopefully emphasized, it's your book. You're writing the book, you're in charge of the revisions. It's about your vision and kind of fulfilling that to the highest potential. At the same time, if the readers are asking for changes, it's sort of like if you are the director of the film and you have a test screening. It's the end of the movie and you think it's the stunning climax and everyone should be weeping, but instead they're giggling and teeing. You're like, oh no. But you as the director can't run into the room and be like, no, you're understanding my movie wrong. You have to go back to the cutting room and recut to produce the intended effect. So similar with revisions, you don't necessarily have to make the changes the readers are suggesting, but you have to incorporate things that address their concerns. So if they're saying the book is too long, maybe part of the problem is it reads long, or maybe it's you get to cut another chapter and publish another journal article. When you're thinking about journal articles, I would say the key thing is don't give away the argument of the book in a journal article. In the same way that I don't want you to crush it on New Books Network, and so people feel like they can just listen to your podcast episode and don't have to buy your book. You don't want people to feel like, oh, well, I read that, I read that article in, HAR or whatever, and now I don't need to read the book because the article laid out the entire research program and the key conceptual argument, and I can just cite the article. Kristen, what would you like to add about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of articles, I think that's a great point. Don't give, the main thing away in the article, but I think it's okay to publish an article or two that might be coming out in your book. It's sort of a form of like pre-publicity, like, getting sort of your name and sort of the book out there in advance of the actual book. So you just want to make sure you understand the agreement that you're signing with the journal publisher. Usually journal publishers are pretty friendly about like, okay, well you can use this material in your book, that's fine. But I did just I'm working on a book now where the journal publisher, who is a for-profit press, is charging a word count and it's like $900 something. So it's like, so you just really want to make sure you understand, what you're signing, and especially if that material is going to be in your book.
I'm sorry, just to go back to the question about the timeline, I think the question about turning your dissertation into a book, if you could talk a little bit about that, especially is there a way for the grad students in the room for them to write their dissertation to make it easier, or are they just two totally separate beasts that they should just accept that the book is just going to look different than the dissertation?
I mean, I would hope that the book looks different. I mean, for different reasons. One, you will be have more writing experience by the time you're writing the book, so hopefully your oral voice will be more developed, and there's also more sources that you're going to be folding into the book, so it'll be different that way. There is we have conversations around title. Like, we want the book to have the best title. So if you have a really fantastic title for your dissertation, maybe consider saving that for the book. Because we don't want the title to be the same title as your dissertation. It just gets confusing in the metadata. We want people to come to the book and not the dissertation. So you can do these this simple thing like save the best title for the book. But in general, it's what Elizabeth was talking about, like your dissertation, you're writing for your dissertation committee, whereas with your book, you're writing for a much broader audience. So, I've had authors say, I wrote my dissertation as a book.
All authors say they wrote their dissertation as a book, and it is never true.
Usually there is work that goes into sort of transforming the dissertation into a book.
A book should never contain a section called literature review.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's fine. I remember, being shocked when my theory chapter, I was encouraged to cut it down to 5 pages for the book.
Correct.
And I was like, oh no. But that becomes
an anthropology problem where it's like, oh, I have this theoretical introduction that sets up all these ideas, and then chapter 1, here is 500 years of very specific history in 30 pages that has very little to do with the arguments the book is making. Don't do that. I think that, and so that's in terms of how much to change. They really are two different genres. And I think understanding that some of the meat of your readings, your engagements with the particular moments from field work or film close reading or poem close reading or whatever your material is, that close reading will stay the same almost certainly, but everything around it needs to shift because you're writing for a different group of people. You're trying to invite people in and keep them with you. And I think this is an interesting segue I think needed to your question about writing subsequent books, and especially if you're shifting audience, right? And I think so the proposal for a subsequent book that's maybe moving into new territory, new methods, it's really important to outline kind of the audience you've established in that field. So, how are you writing differently for those people, or how have you begun reaching out to them? I'm trained as a political scientist, but I've started going to these other conferences, and I know this is a conversation that I'm already involved in, that I'm trying to bridge these fields or whatever. And I think I would say generally it's never too early to talk to an editor about a project if your paths happen to cross. Unless you're at a conference and the editor is swimming laps in the hotel pool and you are also in the hotel pool, and then I would say please don't talk about your book project. It did happen to me. But I would say in terms of submitting materials, I always want to see both a proposal, which is essentially, I think, a speculative fiction document, and a chapter. Because when you're, ideally two, but if you have one and you need an expression of interest from an editor to get a grant or to get teaching leave, like there's all these practical things. And again, like unlike EP, my rules are almost all fake. So I would say my preference is to have 2 chapters, but again, I will not say I refuse to read this until you send me 2 chapters. But I think it's really important to have that example of what the experience of reading the book is actually going to be like. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And in terms of timeline, there is a date that we put in the contract, and that's like a manuscript delivery date. That's kind of, I don't want to say it's a big date, like we need targets, right? But we need to have a date to work with so we can sort of plan things, so we can imagine what kind of schedule it's going to be on. And we love it when you can deliver on that date, but we also know that stuff happens. And so and I get asked a lot, sometimes authors will worry if they have to miss that date that's in the contract. And this is a contractual agreement, that we're not going to tear the contract up. We're pretty we're a really friendly press. We're going to work with you. So if it does take, long from the time, you finish your dissertation to the book, that's okay. Like we're really sort of flexible and can work with you and your schedules.
And I just want to also emphasize something Kristen mentioned, which is just ask. If you have a question, just ask a question. Like we're not, I don't think we're that scary. You have a whole team of people that want your book to succeed, that want to work with you, that want to be in conversation. So if you have something that you're like angsty about, just ask.
There are also books on revising your dissertation. I don't know if you still recommend.
Shout out to Bill Germano.
So there's a classic From Dissertation to Book by Bill Germano, published by the University of Chicago Press. That it's been around for a long time, but I think it holds up, right?
I think like the nuts and bolts advice, there might be some advice about like how books circulate or how libraries buy books, which they don't anymore, that might not be correct, but the nuts and bolts of like literally how do I look at this dissertation chapter and turn it into a book chapter? How do I write a proposal for a book based on my dissertation? Like that advice I think is super sound.
Great, and just to note for those of you who are, upper level graduate students or junior faculty, it's worth looking in your department or your college's guidelines. It might not be that the book needs to be actually in print to count towards your case. It might just need to be like in production, in which case, that 3 years, maybe it's 2.5 years or something like that. So just getting a sense of what is required for a book to count.
Yes, that's also just ask. So be very clear when you're talking to whoever's shepherding your tenure process, usually your department chair. What do I need to have when the file goes in? So if it is the book needs to be in press, that's the same as being in production, and that is a full 12 months before the book is in your hand. If it's unique page proofs, that's usually 6 months before the book is in your hand. If it's just a contract, it can be a little bit more flexible.
Yeah, great. And communicating that to the editor you're working with.
Correct. Let us know so we can tell people.
Great, yeah.
Thank you so very much for your talk. It's really wonderful. This is for English permit. I have questions about how about my peer review is not a satisfactory, but I have the pressures to publish books, for example, promotion or to fulfill the contracts or for another kind of rights requirement. So, but we cannot shove around. It's something a little bit stuck there. Do you have any advice for that? And as for the contract you provide for
this is too big of a question, is you could sort of zoom out and think about sort of how the industry has changed. I remember when we had an event like this, roughly 10 years ago, it was very much the editor that came to talk to us talked about how journal subscriptions very much subsidize, they expect to lose money on books, right? And that journal subscriptions like subsidize books. So I wonder if you could just talk about sort of the industry, like what does that look like? You said libraries aren't buying books. Does that mean you're publishing less books per year? Like how are you sort of zooming out, thinking about, people who might be thinking about publishing in the next 5 to 10 years, where is the industry going in that regard, if you can forecast?
Okay, so I can start with that last question. That's a big question, but it's an important question. So what we're seeing is rise in ebook sales and decline in print book sales. I think libraries will, they'll buy the ebook, right? But maybe not the print book. It's called patron-driven acquisitions, where libraries, you have to request the book before the library will buy it. So that's where, so print sales are definitely, when I started the press 21 years ago, our print runs were, in the several hundreds and tens of thousands. Now it's like in the lower hundreds. There's a new model for it called print on demand. So we can help mitigate the sort of inventory management. So that is one thing presses are doing. They're moving into a print on demand form of publishing, so there isn't like a whole bunch of inventory. So they're not using a lot of resources to print a big print run that may or may not sell and is sitting in a warehouse somewhere. So print on demand is one of the trends. So we will print, batches of books, but it's also allowing us to keep books in print too, right? So that's one thing that is a hallmark of university presses, like our dedication to keep books in print and available, and we're able to do that now through print on demand technology. So we don't, like I mentioned, we don't publish journals, so we don't have that sort of journal platform to help, subsidize the book. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but one thing we do is we do look for subventions, right? So the University of Arizona supports the University of Arizona Press, and the University of Arizona Press is the only university press in the state, but we're publishing faculty from Arizona State and Northern Arizona. So, what we do is we sort of say, can your university pitch in? U of A is supporting us, like, can your university pitch in? So what part of my work is I talk to authors about the possibility, and it's a possibility, if it's not there, it's not there, of subventions, right? So subventions are, small amount of money provided by your institution that will help support the publication of the book. So even though it's not covering all the costs, it helps, right? So that's one thing we're doing, is sort of, there are about 120 university presses, but we're publishing the work from the thousands of universities across campus. So everyone, let's all chip in, So we do these publication subventions is one thing we do.
So the reason that, that was probably Stella who said that, the reason that Duke Press needs our journals program to subsidize our books program is that we do not receive any financial support from Duke University. Unlike the vast majority of university presses which are financially subsidized by their university, we actually pay Duke. That's not on the record. I never said that. Anyway, so that is why we require having a journals program, which thankfully does still help support our books program. We lose about $30,000 to $40,000 on every single book that we publish, with very few exceptions, and those exceptions are the books that allow us to keep going and keep publishing books. So for every book we publish that sells 100 or so copies, we need to have like one Christina Sharp in the wake, one Donna Haraway staying with the trouble, and that underwrites, Sarah Ahmed, bless you, helps us to keep publishing books that are making scholarly arguments that are as important, as foundational, as influential in their fields, but simply have a smaller field or a lower sales potential. Another thing that we are actively doing in terms of seeking out subventions is participating in a number of open access publication programs. I think now open access has been around for long enough that it is no longer stigmatized in the way that I think maybe some people were skeptical when open access publishing first came around. For books that we publish in open access at Duke Press, we will always produce a print version as well, so it's not like your book is just a PDF that lives on the internet. You will still have a print book that is a Duke Press book that is still produced, copy edited, proofread, etc., designed, and is beautiful. So for open access publishing, sometimes individual universities have funds from their libraries to subsidize the books of individual faculty at that university. Sometimes departments have prioritized that. What's exciting now is different forms of collective models are emerging, where libraries from a number of institutions are supporting books published by certain presses. And so we're always seeking out opportunities for that, especially because we publish so much work about the Global South. Making books available open access is a really important way to help those books circulate more broadly in the regions that they are about. We also, of course, are always looking for selling locally rights to a local edition or translations, but that's a lot more work, and it's not always possible, unfortunately. We're also actively selling rights to audiobooks. Some wealthy university presses have a studio where they can record their own. We do not have that, but nevertheless, we are still trying to get audio versions. It's particularly important, right? I work in our disability studies list. It's just a really important access thing. So the state of the industry is scary and dire, but the thing I feel supported in is just to say our political commitments at Duke to support our trans authors, to support our authors of color, to support our first-gen authors are unwavering. We're not, this is core to what we do, this is core to our mission, this is core to why we're involved in publishing, and that's not going anywhere, knock on wood, as long as there is a Duke University Press. And I feel just really committed to that, even as we're seeking out these ways to survive in this time. There's not a cute segue into answering the other questions, but it's, so let me just go back to pitch emails. The problem is I really hate getting pitch emails. The reason is that we have a portal on our website where you can submit your proposal and sample chapters when you have them. And so if someone sends me an email that's like, I have this book I want to pitch, should I submit a proposal? It's like, if you have the proposal, submit the proposal. That's what the website is for. And I don't know if people are concerned that we don't read those, but we do read those. So I think for me, again, because I have this I've retrained myself from graduate school to be a generous reader instead of a paranoid reader. And so if you describe a project to me in 2 paragraphs, I'm like, sure, that could be good. I don't know. It's hard for me to tell often. Very occasionally I get a pitch email and it's obvious that it's not a fit for us, so I can just say thanks but no thanks. But if that person just submitted their material via our portal, they would also get the same response, and it would be less annoying for me because I wouldn't have to shoot them down over email, which is sometimes a hard thing to do. So I would say, if there's a reason to send an email because we're traveling to the editor's campus, or the editor's coming to your campus, or you're going to be at the conference, that's a great time to send an email. To be like, I'd love to meet up, I'd love to talk about the project. I think a lot of things can be accomplished in a conversation. That might be different than considering a formal submission. I think that's great, but I would say, for me, and again, it is editor by editor, but for me, I really prefer to see a proposal and sample chapters via our submission portal. Kristen, how about you?
We don't have a submission portal, so I receive pitches by emails, and what I like to see is a fit with our list. So in the email, just really sort of positioning the book among the books that we do at the University of Arizona Press. So I think that's sort of something that grabs me right away. If you think your book is a fit for one of our series, that's a great thing to put in the email. If we've met at a conference, that's also really nice to see because we meet a lot of folks at conferences and it's sometimes hard to remember everyone. So just a little bit of a trigger in terms of that memory, like a meeting at a conference. That's also very helpful because what I usually do is at night after the conference, I'll make notes of all my meetings and then I can go back to my notes and look at that. So those are some things I like to see and then
What do you not like to see?
Well,
Dear editor.
yeah.
Or like, I think some of the things you were saying was like, you know, if you're pitching a book for a series, but the series hasn't published any books in the last 10 years, then it sort of seems like you're not as up on kind of what Duke Press is currently publishing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot about like the fit. If
Yeah.
it's really like not a fit for our list, it just shows that maybe you didn't do the homework to see what the list, and then it sort of becomes an easy like conversation. You know, like I would say, you know, I'm sorry, it just doesn't, we don't do
Right,
we wouldn't be the right fit for you. It's not just you're not right. It's like we wouldn't be able to publish and market your book.
right, we would be effective at getting your book to the people who you want to read it.
Yeah.
And I know fit kind of sounds like BS, but it really isn't. Like, that is the number one thing, and it's hard to articulate because it's a little vibey. And I, like, you know, you can sort of tell, right, when Erin was rattling off the, like, seemingly kind of random list of things that I acquired. At Duke Press, our lists are sort of vibes-based, and so it's hard to sort of put a finger on sometimes like what makes, you know, there was a year where we published 2 books about the water system in Mumbai, and the 2 books were very different. They were people from different methodological backgrounds, different disciplinary training, making very different arguments, but we did still publish 2 books about the water system in Mumbai in the same year. And yet I can also think of dozens of books about the water system in Mumbai that we rejected, that we turned down, that weren't a fit. And so it is this sort of delicate, kind of affective thing, and also we're always thinking about, you know, there's a certain number of books, because I acquired so many fields, I really can only do, say, 5 African studies books a year, and so when I'm looking at a book, I'm like, yes, this is in an area that we publish in, but when I'm thinking about the 5 books I can do, is this one of the 5? You know, or is this book so compelling that we have to do it, even though it might be more expensive to produce because it has the author wants there to be a lot of images, or it's a very long book or something. So I think it would be nice if I could say, here's the list, and you can guarantee that Duke Press will publish your book, but unfortunately that list does not exist. Even projects that seem like they should be a fit sometimes, things don't work out for whatever reason, and I think that is my segue to Helen's question about peer review. And I think Kristen did mention the situation of split reports. And so again, when we send projects out for review, it's because we believe in them, we want to publish them, we want them to be good. So if we get reports back where one reviewer is saying, this is a great, you know, this is a good project that needs some help, and like, here are my thoughts about how it could be better, and one that's like, wow, no, we will almost always seek out a third report to try to kind of break that tie and split the difference. Ideally, the reader will actually do that, and we are hoping for someone to give us more of a ground to continue with the project, to help us make a better case to our contracts committee, to the editorial board. Sometimes it does not happen. It is true. Sometimes the peer review process just does not work out, and so we do have to send the author away. I would say though, I mean, it's not that common, truly. I would say, I mean, so we publish 150 books a year. At any given time, I have like 40 projects on my list that are in process. Maybe that happens once a year out of all of those projects that we have to send a project away. Sometimes what can happen is it really depends on where the author's at and what their needs are. So sometimes if we get split reports or lukewarm reports, I'll say to the author, I'm committed to you, I'm committed to this project, I see the potential here, I know you can revise it to make it into the book, the highest version that these readers see, but I also know I'm not going to be able to successfully request a contract for you at this stage, but can you commit to me to revise and resubmit, and then send it back out to these readers in hopes that they'll be in a position to say, yes, the book is ready to go at that time. And that is a leap of faith that I'm asking someone to take with me, and sometimes for contract reasons, someone needs a contract, someone needs the book to be out, that's not possible, but often it is. And again, every time I've asked someone to take that leap with me, it has worked out. That they have been able to do the revisions, we've worked on them together, we've hired a developmental editor, and we've been able to produce a version of the manuscript that the readers approve, that the board ends up sometimes being, you know, extremely enthusiastic about. So just because a process gets off to a rocky start does not mean that the book is doomed.
Yeah, and you had asked about conditional contracts, and that is something that we'll do. Like if the reviews are sort of, the project isn't there yet, but I have a lot of confidence in the project. I see the potential. There could be a conditional contract offer, which is a contract. You get the contract. It's showing the commitment to the project. It's just conditional on, like it has to get those peer reviews to before open approval. So we will do conditional contracts. Do you all do conditions?
No, at Duke Press we only have one kind of contract that's equally binding on the press and the author. It represents our full commitment to publish the book. But it is not a conditional contract, but it does contain a clause that like the editorial board has to approve the book before we can publish it. So that is always in our contract.
And then the question about support for non-native English speakers, do you have that, or is that something that the author would have to pursue outside of working with you all?
Yeah, so unfortunately, we do not have specific programs at Duke Press for non-native English speakers or authors of color or first-gen authors. We do publish a significant number of books by people from all of those groups, and as editors work very closely, including doing events like this, to try to demystify the publishing process for people who might be new to it, might not have a lot of experience with it. We're very committed to meeting with scholars across all levels, at conferences, on our campus, etc. We do have a program, our Scholars of Color First Book program, that is for books that have been put into production. It's a production subvention that covers the cost of the index. And often it's very important to me to make sure that award goes to faculty who are not tenure track if we were publishing books by those folks. There are a lot of assumptions built into the economic model of scholarly publishing that include such things as the people who are publishing books with us are not writers who need to make money from their writing. They are faculty members who need to make money from their job, and they need to publish a book to keep their job. So for example, most university presses do not offer advances, especially for first books. Royalties are much lower often at university presses than they are at trade presses, where the assumption is that writers are people who can actually make a living from their writing, which honestly isn't even true at most trade presses. But our economic model also assumes that our authors have access to certain resources, whether that's $1,500 for research funds to pay an indexer, or a couple $1,000 to hire a developmental editor to kind of go over your prose. And I will just say a little more about that because I've not mentioned it twice. So these are people who really engage with like the big picture ideas of a book. So they're not necessarily copy editors, although they can do that. They're not necessarily language editors, although some of them also do that. But they're people who can really look at the big picture, who can help you kind of break down your argument, break down the arc of your book, help you figure out how to do those revisions to achieve that desired effect that the readers are asking for, or just help you get the manuscript in a place where you can submit it. And as the academic job market has tanked, there are more people with PhDs who understand academic argumentation, but do not have full-time jobs, and so there is a burgeoning industry of these developmental editors, and we are often connecting them with people, and always happy to supply that, if that is something that you have the resources to access. But unfortunately, we as a press do not have the resources to offer that kind of support independently beyond the work that we are able to do developmentally in the course of our jobs. So there are occasionally projects where we are involved in that way, where we are doing line editing, but again, of the 30 books that I'm publishing in a year, maybe I'm in 5 of those books in that way.
Yeah, that's the same. I mean, if we can identify it, like whether it comes up in the peer reviews, that maybe the manuscript would benefit from a deeper copy edit, like a line edit, we will invest resources and do that level of deeper copy editing. We also have, because we have books that have Spanish in them, we have bilingual copy editors. We have a lot of books that include indigenous languages, so this is again the EDP team. They have that expertise to know how to typeset diacritics and different indigenous languages. So that expertise comes in the EDP department.
Where are we on time right now?
11:17.
Okay, so we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nina from Political Science, and
marginalized because something happens in this country, like a revolution or a war or a hypothetical president throws a bunch of policies in a hypothetical world, and then if your book is already in this like 3-year timeline, but then something happens that really new piece of evidence or something so important that you need to include it or somehow changes your book, is there any mechanism that you can utilize in that stage where you update your manuscript without the book having to go through another peer review and another 3-year process? How do we deal with that?
Yeah.
And did I see another hand in the back?
Oh, yeah, I'm Smiley again from English. I just wanted to follow up with the question about the recommendations for developmental editors and whether you meant you have names you can share with people in this room who might need a developmental editor to get to the book proposal stage or the manuscript stage, and then I'm asking for
Where do you
people in
find
this room, but also myself. I work with a developmental editor for my first book, and it was great, but they retired and didn't have suggestions. Well, their suggestion wasn't doing developmental editing, so I would love that.
Great. And one more question? Okay, we'll just stick with those two then.
Ideas on Fire is a developmental editing company that hires a lot of PhDs to work on projects.
And a lot of people who have interdisciplinary expertise and work with authors of color, trans and queer authors. They're great from most of the fields that Duke publishes in. A lot of my authors also work with Craig Wilsey, who's trained as a sociologist, but worked with Patricia Clough, who's a theoretical person, and he published a book about homelessness and then left his faculty job, and now he wrote like a great kind of talented Mr. Ridley-esque novel, but also as a developmental editor. And he's just a really interesting person. I also have a bunch of other names that I can share with Erin, or again, because we want people to contact us, despite what I just said about the pitch email, our information is very easy to find on the internet, so I'm very happy to follow up. I have like a whole list. Unfortunately, we used to have Gmail, so I had canned responses. Now I have a Google Doc called Gmail canned responses that I copy and paste into my Outlook. But I do have a list. As far as your hypothetical question goes, Nina, it's like, wow, just hard to fathom. So I'll use my imagination here, and I will say that, for example, I have an author, Elizabeth Ault, who's a historian of science, who's at Penn, whose book was called Binary Logic, and it's all about the invention of binary sex in American sex science across the 20th century. Beans wrote me on January 23rd and said the name of my book is now A Useful Category, which is a phrase from the Anti-Trans Executive Order, and also here is a 10-page epilogue to my book that I have just written. And so that is an example of the kind of thing that can happen. So Beans' book had been approved by the board, but we were in the process of having the final images approved by our art editors to make sure they would like reproduce well. These kind of wild scientific diagrams, very fun. And so as we were getting all those final materials together, this happened. And so we were able to update the title, we were able to include that epilogue without having to send it back out for peer review. I will say that is a pretty extraordinary situation. However, if that had happened later when the book was in copy editing, for example, I think authors often do change like the acknowledgements or add a sentence or two to the epilogue when the book is in copy editing to acknowledge events that have changed. Once the book is in page proofs, it's much more expensive to add material, and you could be charged if you make changes over a certain threshold. So once the book is in page proofs, I think you don't want to be adding new text. But in order to kind of obviate this situation as much as possible, I always encourage people, even ethnographers, especially ethnographers, or people who are writing about current culture that is current at the time we're writing, to understand that it is a 3-year process, that your book is always going to be historical by the time that it comes out. So the more you can think of your book as offering a diagnosis of a particular cultural moment, even if that particular cultural moment is like the John II Trump administration or the Biden administration, or whatever the specific cultural moment is, the more you can kind of zoom out and reflect on what was the conjuncture that was happening, the better you will be positioned to have a book that does kind of stand up, because the book will always be coming out and always be being read in a future time. So you're never writing for the moment. If you want to write for the moment, you can write an op-ed for your newspaper. You can put together an emergency panel at your field conference when it happens. But the book is not the place to do like breaking reportage, generally speaking.
I just will say for the grad students who are here, we now have 2 examples of jobs that are not tenure track jobs. These beautiful people are examples of people who are successful and killing it, and have a background and understand sort of the logic of academic writing, and then developmental editors, which is a whole other career that you might pursue and probably make more money, frankly, than some of us. So, just wanted to highlight that.
Erin, I love that you think that.
Yeah.
I will just say, from an economic perspective, I started making $70,000 a year last year, 11 years after my PhD. So I don't know what they pay at the University of Oregon, but
Maybe those developmental
FYI.
editors.
Yeah, freelance developmental editors. There you go.
Okay. All right. Well, let's thank our Elizabeth and Kristen for being here, for answering your questions. They do just have a lot for next meeting and need a little bit of a break, so please be conscientious of not just all trying to swarm and talk to them at once, so that they can get a drink of water, eat something before they are being put to work in a short period of time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.